Staff Sergeant Rachel Hayes adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses as she walked across the windswept tarmac of Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. At 34, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the sprawling base like a ghost among the thunderous roar of F/A-18 Hornets and the constant bustle of flight operations. Her slight frame, barely meeting the minimum height requirements for the Marines, made her appear almost childlike next to the towering pilots and ground crew who dominated the aviation wing. The thick medical evaluation folder tucked under her arm contained the official verdict that had shaped the last 8 years of her military career: medically unfit for combat operations due to severe myopia and associated depth perception limitations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But those same limitations that had kept her from the front lines were about to become the key to saving 47 Marines trapped behind enemy lines in a mission that would test every assumption about what it meant to be a warrior. The California morning sun cast long shadows across the maintenance hangars as Rachel made her way toward Building 2847, a nondescript concrete structure that housed the Marine Corps' most advanced flight simulation center. Unlike the prestigious pilot training facilities that gleamed with polished surfaces and state-of-the-art displays, this building was utilitarian, almost forgotten among the more glamorous aspects of marine aviation. It was here that Rachel had spent the better part of a decade, relegated to what many considered a dead-end assignment in drone operations and remote piloting systems. Marine Corps Air Station Miramar wasn't just any base. Situated in the hills northeast of San Diego, it served as the West Coast hub for marine aviation, home to multiple fighter squadrons and the training ground for the Corps' most elite pilots. The base buzzed with the constant energy of military aviation excellence, where split-second decisions at 30,000 feet could determine the success of ground operations thousands of miles away. For most Marines stationed here, Miramar represented the pinnacle of technological warfare and military prestige. Rachel's journey to this forgotten corner of the base had begun 8 years earlier during her initial medical evaluation at Paris Island. Fresh out of recruit training and eager to prove herself in combat operations, she had volunteered for every high-intensity military occupational specialty available. Her test scores were exceptional, ranking in the top 5% for tactical reasoning and spatial awareness. Her physical fitness scores, while not outstanding, were well within acceptable ranges. Everything pointed toward a promising career in combat arms or special operations. Then came the comprehensive medical examination that would alter the trajectory of her entire military service. Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Winters, a career military physician with 22 years of experience evaluating Marines for combat readiness, had conducted the vision assessment with clinical thoroughness. The initial test seemed routine: standard eye chart readings, color blindness evaluations, and basic depth perception measurements. Rachel had sailed through the preliminary screenings without concern, confident that her 20/20th's corrected vision would meet all requirements. The problems emerged during the advanced visual acuity tests designed to simulate combat conditions. Under low-light scenarios, her uncorrected vision deteriorated significantly. More critically, the complex depth perception evaluations revealed a subtle but measurable deficit that could prove dangerous in high-stress combat situations. Where accurate distance estimation meant the difference between life and death. Staff Sergeant Hayes, Dr. Winters had explained during the results briefing, her voice carrying the weight of delivering unwelcome news to countless Marines over the years. Your corrected vision is excellent, and your cognitive abilities are clearly superior. However, the depth perception limitations we've identified create unacceptable risks for frontline combat operations. The medical board's decision was swift and final. Rachel would be classified as non-deployable for combat operations and reassigned to support roles that could utilize her intellectual capabilities while accommodating her visual limitations. It was a devastating blow for someone who had enlisted with dreams of leading Marines in combat, but the Corps had protocols for a reason. The reassignment led her to the Marine Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Squadron 3, a unit that operated from a series of climate-controlled trailers and concrete buildings far from the glamorous flight lines where real pilots prepared for real missions. MVU-3 was responsible for operating MQ-9 Reaper drones and providing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance support to Marine ground units deployed worldwide. It was critically important work, but it carried none of the prestige or recognition that came with traditional Marine aviation roles. Rachel's commanding officer during those early years was Major Thomas Crawford, a former CH-53 helicopter pilot who had been reassigned to drone operations after a training accident left him with permanent hearing damage. Crawford understood the frustration of capable Marines who found themselves sidelined from their intended career paths, and he had worked hard to create a professional environment where his personnel could find purpose in their alternative roles. "Hayes," Crawford had told her during their first one-on-one meeting, "I know this isn't what you signed up for. Hell, none of us thought we'd be flying combat missions from air-conditioned trailers instead of cockpits. But the work we do here saves Marines' lives every single day. That's got to count for something." Crawford was right, and Rachel threw herself into mastering every aspect of drone operations with the same intensity she would have brought to infantry training. The MQ-9 Reaper was a sophisticated weapon system, capable of loitering over target areas for up to 14 hours, while providing real-time intelligence to ground commanders. Operating the aircraft required a unique combination of pilot skills, intelligence analysis, and technological expertise that few Marines possessed. The learning curve was steep. Unlike traditional aircraft that responded to immediate physical inputs, drone operations required operators to process multiple information streams simultaneously while compensating for communication delays that could affect split-second targeting decisions. The visual interface consisted of multiple high-definition screens displaying flight data, sensor information, and live video feeds from cameras capable of reading license plates from altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet. Rachel discovered that her visual limitations, so problematic for traditional combat roles, actually provided unexpected advantages in drone operations. Her reliance on corrective lenses had trained her to process visual information more methodically and thoroughly than Marines with perfect natural vision. She developed an almost supernatural ability to detect minute changes in patterns, movements, or environmental conditions that others might miss during routine surveillance missions. Her first deployment came 18 months after joining MVU-3, supporting Operation Enduring Freedom from a remote piloting station at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. For 12 hours each day, Rachel would sit in a windowless trailer, flying combat missions over Afghanistan while living in suburban Las Vegas. The psychological disconnect was surreal. Engaging Taliban positions in the morning, then driving home to a normal American neighborhood for dinner. The deployment statistics spoke to her growing expertise. Over 6 months, Rachel flew 127 combat missions, providing close air support for 43 different Marine units, and delivered precision strikes that eliminated 67 high-value targets without a single incident of collateral damage. Her accuracy rate was unprecedented, earning recognition from ground commanders who specifically requested her support for their most sensitive operations. But recognition in the drone community didn't translate to respect within the broader Marine Corps' culture. To most Marines, especially those in combat arms specialties, drone operations represented the sanitized, video game version of warfare that lacked the courage and sacrifice of traditional combat. Rachel was a POG, a person other than grunt, Operating from safety while real Marines faced danger on the ground, the perception stung, particularly when she returned to Miramar and found herself excluded from the informal networks that defined Marine culture. In the Officers Club, pilots would share stories of air-to-air combat training and carrier operations, while Rachel sat quietly at the periphery, her own combat experiences somehow less valid because they had occurred through a computer screen. Rather than a cockpit winds, Captain James Mitchell exemplified the attitude Rachel faced daily. A former Marine Corps Academy football player turned FA-18 pilot, Mitchell commanded one of Miramar's premier fighter squadrons and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the military hierarchy. His interactions with Rachel were professionally courteous, but carried an unmistakable undertone of dismissal. He had commented during the joint briefing on close air support procedures. It must be nice to fight wars from an office chair. No GI forces, no ejection seat malfunctions, no real consequences if you make a mistake. The comment drew chuckles from the assembled pilots, none of whom understood that Rachel's office chair warfare involved making life or death targeting decisions with the same stakes as any combat pilot, just without the adrenaline rush that came from personal physical danger. Her mistakes wouldn't result in her own death, but they could easily cause the deaths of the Marines she was supposed to protect. Rachel had learned to absorb such comments without reaction, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become her trademark throughout 8 years of being underestimated and overlooked. She focused on her work, continuously improving her skills and expanding her knowledge of emerging drone technologies and tactics. Her personnel file reflected a steady progression of outstanding performance evaluations, advanced technical training, and specialized qualifications that marked her as one of the Corps' premier unmanned systems operators. The technological landscape of drone warfare was evolving rapidly, and Rachel positioned herself at the forefront of every advancement. She completed advanced courses in electro-optical sensor operation, synthetic aperture radar interpretation, and multi-platform coordination that allowed single operators to control multiple aircraft simultaneously. Her security clearance was upgraded to top secret with sensitive compartmented information access, reflecting her involvement in the most classified aspects of Marine Corps intelligence operations. Yet despite her professional accomplishments, Rachel remained largely invisible within the base's social and professional hierarchy. She lived alone in base housing, spent her off-duty hours reading technical manuals or practicing on advanced flight simulators, and maintained minimal social connections with her fellow Marines. The isolation wasn't entirely involuntary. Years of subtle dismissal and professional marginalization had taught her to find satisfaction in competence rather than recognition. Her immediate supervisor, Gunnery Sergeant David Park, was one of the few Marines who fully appreciated Rachel's capabilities. Park had served 3 combat tours as an artillery forward observer before transitioning to drone operations following the shoulder injury that ended his infantry career. He understood both the technical complexity of Rachel's work and the cultural challenges she faced as a non-combat specialist in a combat organization. "You know, Hayes," Park had observed during one of their monthly counseling sessions, "you've got skills that 90% of this base would kill for. The problem is that 90% of this base doesn't even know what you do, let alone how well you do it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Park was right, but Rachel had made peace with her role in the Marine Corps' ecosystem. She was a specialist in a narrow but critically important field, providing capabilities that kept Marines alive even if those Marines never knew her name or appreciated her contributions. It was enough, or at least she had convinced herself it was enough. The routine of her daily life at Miramar had become comfortable in its predictability. Morning physical training with her squadron, though she was excused from the more demanding exercises due to her medical profile. Equipment maintenance and systems checks in the Climate-Controlled Operations Center. Hours of flight time supporting ongoing operations in various global hotspots. Her multiple screens displaying real-time video feeds from aircraft operating thousands of miles away. Administrative duties, technical training, and the endless paperwork that accompanied any military position involving classified equipment and operations that Rachel had grown accustomed to walking through the base unnoticed, her slight frame and unremarkable appearance allowing her to blend into the background of Marine Corps life. She wore the same utilities as every other Marine, but somehow they seemed to hang differently on her, marking her as someone who belonged to the institution without truly being part of its warrior culture. Her quarters reflected the same utilitarian efficiency that characterized her professional life. A single room in the bachelor enlisted quarters, decorated with only the minimum personal items required to make the space habitable. Technical manuals stacked neatly on a desk alongside a high-end laptop computer she used for continued education in drone systems and tactics. A few photographs from her hometown in Ohio, showing the family she rarely had time to visit. No military awards or commendations displayed. Despite having earned several decorations for her deployment service, the isolation might have been crushing for someone who had enlisted seeking the brotherhood and camaraderie that define Marine culture. But Rachel had learned to find purpose in mastery, satisfaction in the quiet knowledge that she possessed skills and capabilities that few others could match. When she sat in the operations center, hands moving across multiple keyboards, while her eyes tracked information across 6 different screens, she was operating at a level of technical proficiency that represented the cutting edge of modern warfare. Still, there were moments when the weight of professional isolation became particularly acute. Watching younger Marines receive recognition for achievements that paled in comparison to her own operational record. Listening to conversations about deployment experiences and combat operations where her contributions were overlooked or minimized. Attending mandatory social functions where she stood at the margins, professionally respected, but personally invisible. The medical evaluation folder she carried that morning contained the annual review that would determine whether her combat restrictions remained in place. 8 years of exemplary service had done nothing to change the fundamental visual limitations that kept her classified as non-deployable for frontline operations. Dr. Winters, now a full colonel, continued to oversee her case with the same clinical thoroughness that had originally identified her limitations. Rachel harbored no illusions that this year's evaluation would yield different results. Her vision hadn't improved, and the Corps' medical standards hadn't changed to accommodate her unique circumstances. She would continue in her current role, providing critical support from the shadows while more visible. Marines received the recognition and advancement opportunities that came with combat leadership positions. As she approached the simulation center that morning, Rachel had no way of knowing that within hours, a crisis would emerge that would shatter every assumption about her limitations and reveal capabilities that even she didn't fully understand. The same visual processing differences that had kept her from combat operations were about to become the key to saving 47 Marines, whose lives hung in the balance of a mission gone catastrophically wrong. The worn ID card badge that swung from her uniform blouse identified her simply as Hayes R. Drone Operations Specialist. It was an accurate but incomplete description of someone whose precision and dedication were about to be tested in ways that would redefine what it meant to be a warrior in the modern Marine Corps. The secure communication terminal and building 2847 erupted with priority alerts at 0347 hours, its shrill electronic tone cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of the Drone Operations Center. Rachel had been conducting routine maintenance on the MQ-9 control systems when the incoming transmission triggered every high-priority protocol in the facility. The message header displayed classifications she had never seen before. Flash, override, immediate commander attention, operational emergency. Within minutes, the operations center transformed from its typical overnight skeleton crew to a hub of frantic activity. Major Susan Walsh, the current commanding officer of MVU-3, burst through the reinforced doors still wearing her physical training gear, having been summoned directly from her morning run. Behind her came a stream of personnel Rachel recognized. From various base departments, intelligence analysts, communications specialists, and senior staff officers whose presence indicated something far beyond routine operations. "Hayes, front and center," Major Walsh commanded, her usually composed demeanor replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a crisis commander. "We need your assessment on something that just came through channels." The main display screen flickered to life, revealing a grainy satellite image of mountainous terrain somewhere in the Middle East. Rachel immediately recognized the distinctive geological formations of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region, an area she had surveyed countless times during her deployment rotations. But something was wrong with this particular image. The resolution was far lower than standard reconnaissance satellites typically provided, and the timestamp indicated it was less than 30 minutes old. Colonel Marcus Brennan, the base's deputy commander for operations, entered the center with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to making decisions under extreme pressure. At 48, Brennan was a decorated infantry officer who had commanded Marine units in 3 different theaters of operation before taking his current staff position. His presence meant whatever crisis had developed transcended normal operational channels and required immediate senior leadership attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan began without preamble, 6 hours ago, a Marine Force reconnaissance team designated Reaper 7 went dark during a high-value target elimination mission. In the Spin Gar Mountains, 47 Marines, including a full platoon of infantry and supporting elements, are currently missing behind enemy lines with no communication and limited intelligence on their status or location. The weight of those words settled over the operations center like a physical presence. 47 Marines represented more than just numbers on a casualty report. They were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, fellow warriors whose lives now hung in the balance of decisions made in this windowless concrete building thousands of miles from the crisis zone. Rachel felt her pulse quicken as the implications became clear. A Marine Force reconnaissance unit didn't simply go dark during routine operations. These were among the Corps' most elite warriors, trained to operate independently behind enemy lines for extended periods. If Reaper 7 had lost communication, it meant they were either dead, captured, or facing circumstances so dire that standard protocols had completely broken down. Major Walsh activated the secure communication link to Quantico, where Marine Corps headquarters was coordinating the crisis response. The voice that emerged from the speakers belonged to Brigadier General Robert Hayes, no relation to Rachel, despite the shared surname, the Director of Operations for Marine Corps. Forces Command. "Miramar, this is General Hayes. Time is critical, so I'll be direct." Reaper 7 was conducting a joint operation with CIA and Special Operations Command to eliminate a high-value terrorist target in a compound approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Kabul. The mission parameters included a narrow window of opportunity based on intelligence indicating the target would be present for less than 6 hours. The general's voice carried the strain of someone who had been awake for far longer than advisable, making life or death decisions while operating on caffeine and determination. Initial reports indicated mission success, with the primary target eliminated and the team beginning extraction procedures. Then all communication ceased. Satellite imagery shows evidence of a significant firefight at the compound, but we cannot determine friendly casualty status or current location of our personnel. Rachel studied the satellite image more carefully, her trained eye picking out details that others might miss. The compound showed clear signs of recent combat, blast patterns consistent with explosive charges, vehicle tracks indicating rapid movement, and thermal signatures suggesting fires that had burned recently enough to still generate detectable heat. Most concerning was the absence of any human thermal signatures in areas where Marines should have established security perimeters during extraction. The weather situation complicates everything, General Hayes continued. A massive storm front is moving through the region, bringing heavy snow and winds that will ground all aircraft for the next 18 to 24 hours. Traditional rescue operations are impossible until the weather clears, but intelligence suggests enemy forces are converging on the area to locate and capture or eliminate our personnel. Colonel Brennan stepped forward, his expression reflecting the gravity of command decisions that could determine the fate of 47 Marines. General, what are our immediate options? Standard search and rescue protocols assume we can put aircraft and ground teams into the area within hours of a crisis. That's exactly the problem, Colonel. We're looking at a minimum of 24 hours before we can launch conventional rescue operations, and that assumes the weather cooperates. Our people could be dead or captured long before we can reach them through traditional means. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. Every person in the operations center understood the mathematics of survival behind enemy lines. Elite Marines could potentially evade capture for extended periods under normal circumstances, but wounded personnel, limited ammunition, and hostile weather created variables that exponentially reduced survival probability with each passing hour. Major Walsh glanced at Rachel, a calculating look in her eyes that suggested she was already formulating possibilities that others hadn't considered. General, what about non-conventional assets? Do we have any capabilities in theater that could provide immediate support? There was a pause before General Hayes responded, the silence filled with the weight of classified operations and capabilities that couldn't be discussed on even secure communication channels. Limited options. Major, most of our unmanned assets in the region are committed to other high-priority missions, and those that are available lack the specialized capabilities required for this type of operation. Rachel felt a familiar sensation, the same heightened awareness that came during complex drone operations, when multiple variables converge to create critical decision points. Her mind was already processing the tactical situation, analyzing the terrain from the satellite imagery, and calculating the possibilities for unmanned reconnaissance and support missions that could bridge the gap until conventional rescue operations became feasible. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice barely audible in the tense atmosphere of the operations center, "may I ask about the specific parameters of the search area and the capabilities we would need to locate and support the missing personnel?" Colonel Brennan turned toward her with surprise, apparently having forgotten that the junior enlisted Marine was even present during this high-level crisis briefing. His expression suggested mild annoyance at the interruption, but Major Walsh intervened before he could respond. "Staff Sergeant Hayes is our most experienced unmanned systems operator," Walsh explained. "She's flown more combat hours than anyone else in the squadron and has intimate knowledge of operations in that specific geographical region." General Hayes' voice emerged from the speakers with renewed interest. "Staff Sergeant, what are you thinking?" Rachel took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would either be dismissed as impossible or represent the beginning of the most challenging mission of her career. "Sir, based on the satellite imagery and my knowledge of the terrain, I believe it might be possible to conduct extended unmanned reconnaissance using specialized sensor packages and communication relay capabilities. If the missing personnel are still mobile and have tactical radios, we might be able to establish contact and provide overwatch support until weather conditions improve." The operations center fell silent as senior officers processed the implications. of her suggestion. What Rachel was proposing went far beyond standard drone operations. It would require flying unmanned aircraft in weather conditions that challenged even the most advanced systems, operating at the edge of communication range, and providing support for ground personnel whose exact location and status remained unknown. Staff Sergeant, Colonel Brennan said carefully, are you suggesting that unmanned systems could somehow locate and support 47 missing Marines in hostile territory during a major storm system? Not exactly, sir, Rachel replied, her mind racing through the technical possibilities and limitations. What I'm suggesting is that we might be able to establish a communication relay and surveillance network that could help the missing personnel coordinate their own survival and evasion efforts, while providing intelligence that would improve the effectiveness of eventual rescue operations. She moved to the main display terminal, calling up detailed topographical maps of the Spingar Mountains and overlaying them with weather data and known enemy positions. Her fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, building a visual representation of the tactical situation that clearly illustrated both the challenges and potential solutions. The MQ-9 has a loiter time of approximately 14 hours with standard fuel loads, she explained, highlighting potential flight paths and coverage areas. With aerial refueling, we could maintain continuous coverage for extended periods. More importantly, the advanced sensor packages can penetrate limited weather conditions and provide thermal imaging that might locate personnel even when visual observation is impossible. Major Walsh nodded slowly, beginning to understand the scope of what Rachel was proposing. You're talking about creating an unmanned command and control network that could serve as an interim solution until conventional rescue assets become available. Exactly, ma'am. The key would be establishing communication with the missing personnel first, then providing overwatch and coordination support that leverages their own survival training and combat capabilities. General Hayes' voice carried a note of cautious optimism when he responded. Staff Sergeant, what would you need to make this work? And more importantly, what are the realistic chances of success? Rachel paused, considering the honest assessment that senior leadership needed to make informed decisions. Sir, it would require authorization to operate outside normal flight parameters, access to specialized communication equipment, and probably 12 to 16 hours of continuous operations under challenging conditions. The success probability depends on too many unknown variables to calculate precisely, but it represents our best option for providing immediate support. She highlighted specific areas on the topographical display, showing potential landing zones, natural shelter locations, and terrain features that could either assist or hinder survival efforts. The biggest advantage is that force reconnaissance personnel are trained for exactly this type of scenario. If they're alive and mobile, they'll be following standard evasion protocols that should make them detectable by advanced sensor systems. Colonel Brennan studied the display with the calculating gaze of someone weighing acceptable risks against potential outcomes. Staff Sergeant, you understand that what you're proposing is essentially a solo mission into some of the most dangerous airspace in the world, using equipment and techniques that have never been tested under these specific conditions? Yes, sir, I understand. And you believe you have the capability to execute this mission successfully? Rachel met his gaze directly, drawing on 8 years of accumulated expertise and countless hours of combat operations that had never received recognition or acknowledgement. Sir, I believe it's our best chance to save those Marines. The communication link crackled as General Hayes conferred with his staff at Quantico, their voices too low to be clearly audible, but the urgency evident in their tone. After several minutes, his voice returned with the weight of command decision. Colonel Brennan, you are authorized to proceed with Staff Sergeant Hayes' proposal. All necessary resources and support personnel are at your disposal. This operation receives the highest priority classification, and Staff Sergeant Hayes will have direct communication access to this command for the duration of the mission. Major Walsh was already moving toward the equipment storage area, calling over her shoulder to Rachel. Hayes, how long do you need to prepare the aircraft and systems for extended operations? 2 hours for equipment modifications and pre-flight preparations, ma'am. Another hour for communication system integration and final systems checks. You have it. Colonel Brennan will need authorization for the specialized sensor packages and extended range communication equipment. As the operations center erupted into coordinated activity, Rachel felt the familiar calm that preceded her most challenging missions. The technical obstacles were significant, the risk factors numerous, and the consequences of failure potentially catastrophic. But for the first time in 8 years, she would be operating at the full extent of her capabilities, utilizing every skill and technique she had mastered during her marginalized career. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same visual processing differences that had kept her from combat operations were now essential to a mission that could determine the survival of 47 Marines. Her ability to interpret complex visual data, process multiple information streams simultaneously, and maintain focus during extended high-stress operations had never been more critical. Captain Mitchell appeared in the operations center as Rachel was beginning her mission preparations, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious concern for the missing Marines. "Hayes," he said quietly, approaching her workstation where she was configuring communication protocols. "I heard about what you're planning to do. That's incredible." She looked up from her preparation work, noting the genuine respect in his voice for the first time since she had known him. "It's what needs to be done, sir. I wanted you to know that if there's anything our squadron can provide, technical support, additional personnel, anything at all, you just have to ask." The offer represented a fundamental shift in how her fellow Marines viewed her capabilities, but Rachel was already too focused on mission preparation to fully appreciate its significance. "Thank you, sir. Right now I just need time to get the systems configured correctly." As Mitchell walked away, Gunnery Sergeant Park appeared at her shoulder with a steaming cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "You know, Hayes, I always said you had skills that 90% of this base would kill for. Looks like we're about to find out if I was right." Rachel accepted the coffee gratefully, her mind already shifting into the operational focus that would sustain her through the next 18 hours. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, 47 Marines were counting on capabilities they didn't even know existed, operated by someone they had never heard of, whose precision and dedication were about to be tested in ways that would redefine what it meant to serve. The modified MQ-9 Reaper that sat on the runway at 0630 hours bore little resemblance to the standard configuration Rachel had operated for 8 years. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, the squadron's lead avionics specialist, had worked through the night installing specialized equipment that pushed the aircraft's capabilities beyond manufacturer specifications. Extended range fuel tanks replaced standard weapon pylons, while an array of experimental sensor packages occupied every available mounting point on the aircraft's fuselage. "Hayes, this thing is carrying more electronics than a Best Buy warehouse," Santos commented as she completed final systems checks on the communication relay equipment. "The power requirements alone are pushing the electrical system to its absolute limits. You're going to need to manage energy consumption carefully to maintain all systems throughout the mission duration." Rachel nodded, studying the technical readouts that displayed power draw from each individual component. The specialized thermal imaging system alone consumed 3 times the electricity of standard reconnaissance packages, while the advanced communication relay equipment required continuous power to maintain signal strength across the extended range. They would be operating at The weather reports from the target area painted an increasingly grim picture. Meteorologist Captain Linda Chun had been providing hourly updates throughout the night, each one confirming that conditions were deteriorating faster than initial forecasts had predicted. Wind speeds approaching 60 knots, visibility reduced to less than 50 meters, and temperatures dropping to levels that would challenge even the most advanced cold weather survival equipment. "The storm system is massive," Captain Chun explained to the assembled mission team. "Satellite imagery shows it covers an area roughly the size of Colorado, with the most severe conditions concentrated exactly where we need to operate. Traditional aircraft wouldn't last 10 minutes in these conditions, and even our modified drone will be operating at the very edge of survivable parameters." Colonel Brennan stood before the main display screen, where a three-dimensional tactical map showed the last known position of Reaper 7, overlaid with current weather conditions and estimated enemy positions. Intelligence updates from various classified sources had painted an increasingly complex picture of the tactical situation facing the missing Marines. Latest intelligence indicates at least 3 separate enemy groups converging on the target area, he announced to the room. Taliban forces moving south from their strongholds in the Korangal Valley, local militia groups approaching from the east, and what appears to be a specialized tracking unit moving north from Pakistan. Total enemy strength is estimated at 200 to 300 personnel, most with intimate knowledge of the terrain. The mathematics were sobering. 47 Marines potentially wounded and low on ammunition, facing overwhelming odds in hostile territory. During the worst weather conditions the region had experienced in decades. Even if they had successfully evaded immediate capture, their survival window was measured in hours rather than days. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Thompson, on loan from Navy Special Warfare Command, had flown in from Coronado specifically to provide expertise on personnel recovery operations in hostile environments. His weathered face and quiet demeanor spoke of someone who had conducted similar missions in circumstances where failure meant leaving fellow warriors behind. "The key factor we're dealing with here is time compression," Thompson explained to Rachel during their final briefing. "In normal CSSR operations, we have the luxury of extensive planning and overwhelming force application. This situation requires us to work with incomplete information, minimal resources, and a constantly deteriorating tactical picture." Rachel absorbed every detail, her mind already processing the multiple contingencies and decision trees that would define the next 18 hours. The mission parameters were unlike anything in her experience or training. She would be operating a single unmanned aircraft across distances that challenged communication systems, in weather that exceeded safe operating conditions, to locate personnel whose exact status and location remained unknown. The technical challenges alone were staggering. The MQ-9 standard communication range topped out at approximately 1,200 kilometers under ideal conditions. The mountainous terrain and severe weather would reduce that effective range significantly, requiring her to position the aircraft in locations where signal relay became possible while maintaining sufficient altitude to avoid ground-based threats. Dr. Elizabeth Rodriguez, a civilian contractor specializing in advanced sensor technology, had arrived from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division to oversee integration of the experimental thermal imaging system. The prototype technology had never been tested under operational conditions, but theoretical capabilities suggested it could penetrate weather conditions that would blind traditional reconnaissance systems. The synthetic aperture radar can provide terrain mapping even in zero visibility conditions, Dr. Rodriguez explained as she walked Rachel through the system's capabilities. More importantly, the thermal imaging array can detect human body heat through moderate snow cover and some building materials. If your missing personnel are alive and maintaining normal body temperature, this system should be able to locate them. The qualifier was important. If they were maintaining normal body temperature. Marines suffering from hypothermia, severe injuries, or death would generate significantly reduced thermal signatures that might not register above background environmental conditions. The system's effectiveness depended on finding living, mobile personnel rather than casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, the base's senior intelligence officer, had spent the night coordinating with various agencies to develop the most current threat assessment possible. Her briefing revealed the complexity of operating in a region where tribal loyalties, international politics, and religious extremism created a constantly shifting tactical environment. The compound where Reaper 7 conducted their initial operation was a suspected meeting site for senior Taliban leadership. Williams explained, "The fact that they were able to eliminate their primary target suggests the intelligence was accurate, but it also means enemy response will be swift and overwhelming. They won't just be looking for our people to capture them. They'll want to make an example that deters future operations." Rachel studied the detailed terrain maps one final time, memorizing geographical features that might become critical during the mission. The Spingar Mountains were among the most challenging operational environments on Earth, with elevations ranging from 2,000 to over 4,000 meters, limited vegetation, and weather patterns that could change from clear skies to blizzard conditions. Within minutes, the cultural dynamics added another layer of complexity. The region was populated by Pashtun tribes whose loyalties shifted based on complex historical grievances, financial incentives, and family relationships that outsiders rarely understood. Some tribal leaders might provide assistance to American forces, while others would actively collaborate with Taliban and Al-Qaeda, elements seeking to eliminate the missing Marines. At 0800 hours, General Hayes' voice emerged from the communication system with final authorization and updated intelligence. "Miramar, this is Quantico. Weather conditions have accelerated our timeline. Latest reports indicate enemy forces are moving faster than anticipated, and we have intercepted communications suggesting they may have intelligence on our personnel's general location." The implication was clear. The window for successful rescue was closing faster than anyone had hoped. Rachel would need to locate the missing Marines, establish communication, and coordinate their survival efforts before enemy forces could overwhelm them through sheer numbers and local knowledge. Staff Sergeant Hayes, General Hayes continued, "You are authorized to use any and all capabilities at your disposal to locate and support our personnel. This mission receives presidential-level priority, and you have direct communication access to the highest levels of command throughout the operation." Rachel felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical presence. Presidential-level priority meant that success or failure would be evaluated at the very top of the military and political hierarchy. More importantly, it meant that 47 Marines and their families were counting on capabilities she had never fully tested under real-world conditions. Walsh approached her workstation as final pre-flight preparations neared completion. "Hayes, I want you to understand something before you begin this mission. What you're attempting has never been done before. The technical challenges, weather conditions, and tactical complexity exceed anything in our operational experience." She paused, making direct eye contact with Rachel in a way that conveyed both confidence and concern. "But if anyone can make this work, it's you. Your operational record, technical expertise, and dedication to the mission make you our best hope for bringing those Marines home." The modified MQ-9 was wheeled out of the hangar at 0830 hours, its unusual configuration drawing attention from personnel throughout the base. Word of the emergency mission had spread through informal networks, and Marines from various units had gathered to watch the launch. Their expressions reflected the gravity of the situation and a newfound respect for capabilities they were only beginning to understand. Rachel completed her final equipment checks methodically, verifying communication systems, sensor packages, and flight control responses with the thoroughness that had characterized her approach to every mission over 8 years. The aircraft's modified weight distribution required adjustments to standard takeoff procedures, while the experimental equipment demanded constant monitoring of power consumption and thermal management. Tower, this is Reaper 1 requesting immediate departure clearance for priority mission, she transmitted as the aircraft's engines spooled up to operational temperature. Reaper 1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Winds are gusting to 30 knots from the southwest. Good hunting. The MQ-9 accelerated down the runway with noticeably different handling characteristics due to its modified configuration. Rachel compensated for the altered center of gravity and increased weight, managing the takeoff with the precision that came from thousands of hours of flight experience. As the aircraft climbed through 5,000 feet, she began the long transit toward Afghanistan, knowing that she was embarking on the most challenging mission of her career. The flight to the operational area would take approximately 6 hours, providing time to test all systems under actual flight conditions and coordinate with intelligence assets that might provide updated information on the missing Marine's status. Rachel settled into the focused mindset that would sustain her through the next 18 hours, her multiple screens displaying navigation data, weather updates, and communication protocols that would determine the success or failure of an impossible mission. Behind her in the operations center, Major Walsh monitored her progress while coordinating with agencies and commands across the globe. Colonel Brennan maintained communication with senior leadership, providing hourly updates on mission status and weather conditions. Technical Sergeant Santa stood by with replacement equipment and troubleshooting expertise that might become critical if the modified systems began failing under operational stress. But ultimately, the success of Operation Guardian Angel, the designation assigned to Rachel's mission, would depend on the skills, dedication, and precision of a single Marine who had spent 8 years being overlooked and underestimated. The same visual processing differences that had kept her from combat operations were now essential to locating 47 Marines, whose survival depended on capabilities that existed nowhere else in the military. As the MQ-9 crossed into international airspace, Rachel began the systematic sensor sweeps that would either locate the missing personnel or confirm the worst fears of everyone monitoring the mission. The storm clouds ahead grew larger and more ominous with each passing mile, while her aircraft continued its solitary journey toward a rendezvous with circumstances that would test every assumption about courage, capability, and what it meant to serve. The radio crackled with her first status report. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. On course, on time, all systems are nominal. Beginning approach to the operational area in 4 hours. Will maintain communication schedule as conditions permit. The mission that would either save 47 Marines or join them in becoming casualties of war had officially begun. 4 hours into the flight, Rachel encountered her first major crisis as the MQ-9 approached the outer edges of the massive storm system. The aircraft's modified weight distribution, which had seemed manageable during takeoff, now created dangerous instabilities as increasingly violent air currents battered the drone from multiple directions simultaneously. Wind speeds that had been forecast at 60 knots were registering closer to 80, with gusts powerful enough to flip conventional aircraft like toys. Miramar, this is Reaper 1, Rachel transmitted through the increasingly static-filled communication link. Encountering severe turbulence at the storm periphery. Aircraft handling is marginal but stable. Continuing approach to the operational area. The calm professionalism in her voice masked the reality of what she was experiencing through the aircraft's sensor feeds. The MQ-9's internal cameras showed equipment secured throughout the fuselage, shifting and straining against mounting brackets never designed for this level of punishment. Temperature readings indicated the experimental thermal imaging system was generating more heat than anticipated, threatening to overwhelm cooling systems already pushed beyond design specifications. In the operations center at Miramar, technical Sergeant Santos monitored telemetry data with growing concern. The aircraft's electrical systems were drawing power at rates that exceeded sustainable levels, while structural stress indicators showed wing loading approaching critical thresholds. "Major Walsh," she called across the room, "we're seeing power consumption rates that could drain backup systems within 6 hours. If she loses primary electrical power, the mission becomes impossible." Major Walsh studied the readouts with the calculating gaze of someone weighing acceptable risks against mission requirements. The mathematical reality was stark. Rachel needed approximately 14 hours of continuous operation to complete the search and rescue coordination mission. At current power consumption rates, she had perhaps 8 hours of reliable system operation remaining. "Hayes," Walsh transmitted. "Be advised your power consumption is exceeding projected levels. You may need to prioritize systems to extend operational time." Rachel's response came through heavy static as the storm interference increased. "Copy. Miramar, I'm already cycling non-essential systems to conserve power. We'll prioritize communication and thermal imaging capabilities over secondary sensors." The decision represented the first of many tactical compromises she would face throughout the mission. Each system she powered down reduced her overall situational awareness and capability, but maintaining core functions was essential to locating the missing Marines. The experimental thermal imaging array alone consumed 40% of the aircraft's available power, but without it, finding personnel in the severe weather conditions would be virtually impossible. As the MQ-9 penetrated deeper into the storm system, Rachel encountered weather conditions that exceeded anything in her operational experience. Snow fell so heavily that visual cameras became completely useless, while ice accumulation on sensor housings threatened to disable the very equipment she needed most. The aircraft's de-icing systems, designed for moderate conditions, struggled to maintain functionality as external temperatures plummeted to -30°C. "Jesus," she muttered under her breath. Watching ice crystals form on camera lenses faster than heating elements could clear them. The storm wasn't just challenging her technical capabilities. It was testing the fundamental limits of what unmanned systems could accomplish under extreme environmental conditions. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication system from her monitoring station in California. "Reaper 1, we're seeing thermal system performance within acceptable parameters despite the external conditions. The synthetic aperture radar is penetrating the precipitation and providing terrain mapping. You should have the capability to detect human thermal signatures even through moderate snow cover." The reassurance was welcome, but Rachel knew that theoretical capabilities and real-world performance often diverged significantly under operational stress. The thermal imaging system had never been tested in these specific conditions, and equipment failures at this stage of the mission would doom any chance of locating the missing Marines. At 13:47 hours, Rachel finally reached the approximate coordinates where Reaper 7 had last reported their position. The landscape below was a moonscape of rocky peaks and deep valleys, all obscured by swirling snow that reduced visibility to near zero. Through the synthetic aperture radar, she could make out the compound where the Marines had conducted their initial operation, a cluster of damaged buildings that showed clear evidence of the recent firefight. "Miramar, this is Reaper 1. I'm over the last known position. Beginning systematic search pattern. No immediate thermal signatures detected in the primary target area." The absence of thermal signatures at the compound wasn't necessarily bad news. If the Marines had successfully extracted from the objective area, they would have moved to predetermined rally points designed to provide concealment from enemy forces. Rachel began expanding her search pattern, using predetermined protocols that assumed the missing personnel would follow their training even under extreme duress. The search methodology required her to balance multiple competing factors: maximizing coverage area while maintaining sufficient detail resolution to detect individual personnel, conserving power while operating all necessary sensor systems, and maintaining communication with base while avoiding enemy detection. Each decision point involved trade-offs that could determine mission success or failure. "Contact," Rachel announced after 2 hours of systematic searching. "I'm picking up thermal signatures consistent with human personnel approximately 8 kilometers northeast of the compound. Count shows 16 to 18 individuals in what appears to be a defensive position." The thermal imaging revealed a group of figures clustered in a natural depression that provided some protection from the wind and snow. Their heat signatures indicated they were alive and mobile, but the positioning suggested they were either wounded or taking defensive measures against potential threats. More concerning was the count. If this was part of Reaper 7, it meant that nearly 30 Marines remained unaccounted for. Major Walsh's voice carried barely controlled excitement when she responded. "Reaper 1, can you establish communication with the personnel you've located?" Rachel activated the specialized communication relay equipment, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that all Marine units would monitor during survival situations. Any Marine station, this is Guardian Angel overhead. If you can hear this transmission, respond with an authentication code for your unit designation." Static filled the airwaves for nearly a full minute before a weak voice emerged through the interference. "Guardian Angel, this is Reaper 7 Actual. Authentication code Bravo 779er. Say again your call sign and status." The relief in the operations center was palpable as communication was finally established with the missing Marines. But Rachel maintained her professional focus, knowing that making contact was only the beginning of an extremely complex rescue. Coordination effort. "Reaper 7 Actual, this is Guardian Angel. I'm operating an unmanned reconnaissance platform providing overwatch and communication relay for your unit. What is your current status and personnel count?" The voice that responded belonged to Captain Michael Torres, the Force Reconnaissance Team leader, whose personnel file Rachel had memorized during mission preparation. Torres was a decorated combat veteran with 3 deployments and extensive experience in special operations, exactly the type of Marine who could keep his unit alive in impossible circumstances. "Guardian Angel, we have 18 Marines at this location, including 4 walking wounded and 2 stretcher cases. We successfully eliminated the primary target, but were compromised during extraction. Lost vehicles to RPG attack and have been moving on foot for approximately 16 hours. Rachel processed the information quickly, already beginning calculations for medical evacuation requirements and movement possibilities. "Reaper 7 Actual, what is your ammunition and medical supply status?" Guardian Angel ammunition is at approximately 30% across all weapon systems. Medical supplies are adequate for current casualties, but limited for extended operations. We have cold weather gear, but require shelter from current weather conditions within 6 hours. The time constraint was critical. Even elite Marines couldn't survive indefinitely in the current weather conditions without proper shelter, and their casualty situation would deteriorate rapidly if they couldn't find protection from the storm. Rachel needed to locate suitable shelter options while simultaneously searching for the remaining 29 missing Marines. "Reaper 7 Actual, I'm transmitting grid coordinates for 3 potential shelter locations within your movement capability. The nearest is a cave complex approximately 2 kilometers to your northeast. Can you move casualties that distance?" Torres' response reflected the grim reality of their situation. "Guardian Angel, we can move the walking wounded, but the stretcher cases will require significant time and expose us to enemy observation. Request information on hostile force locations in our area." Rachel had been monitoring enemy movement patterns throughout her search operations, using the thermal imaging system to track multiple groups converging on the area. The tactical picture was increasingly dangerous, with Taliban and militia forces moving through the mountains in coordinated search patterns that suggested they had general knowledge of the Marines' location. Reaper 7 Actual. I'm tracking approximately 40 hostile personnel in 3 separate groups moving through your area. The nearest group is approximately 3 kilometers to your south and moving generally in your direction. You have a movement window of roughly 2 hours before they reach your current position. The mathematics of survival were becoming increasingly stark. Torres had 18 Marines, including casualties that would slow movement significantly, facing overwhelming enemy numbers and weather conditions that limited visibility but also provided concealment. Any movement would be dangerous, but remaining stationary guaranteed eventual discovery and elimination. Guardian Angel. Torres transmitted after a brief pause. We're going to need more than shelter coordinates. Can you provide direct support if we're engaged during movement? Rachel hesitated before responding, knowing that what Torres was asking went beyond her official mission parameters. The MQ-9 carried no weapon systems in its current configuration, having been modified purely for reconnaissance and communication relay. Her ability to provide direct support was limited to intelligence and coordination rather than actual firepower. Reaper 7 Actual, negative on direct fire support. But I can provide real-time intelligence on enemy positions and coordinate with other assets for potential support options. Even as she spoke, Rachel was already formulating possibilities that pushed the boundaries of conventional thinking. While she couldn't provide direct fire support, she had capabilities that might prove equally valuable in the right circumstances. The key would be using her unique position and sensor capabilities in ways that provided tactical advantages to the Marines on the ground. Be advised, Reaper 7 Actual, I'm also continuing search operations for your remaining personnel. Do you have information on the status and location of the other elements of your unit? Torres' response carried the weight of command responsibility and the uncertainty that came with incomplete information under combat conditions. Guardian Angel, we were separated during the initial contact. The last confirmed position of Reaper 7 Bravo was approximately 12 kilometers southeast of our location. Reaper 7 Charlie was providing overwatch from elevated positions northeast of the compound. No communication with either element since 0630 this morning. The mission complexity had just doubled. Rachel now needed to locate and coordinate rescue efforts for 3 separate groups of Marines scattered across dozens of square kilometers of hostile territory, all while managing power consumption issues that threatened to end her mission prematurely. Each group faced different tactical situations and survival challenges that required individualized solutions. Understood, Reaper 7 Actual. Continue monitoring this frequency. I'll provide movement instructions and enemy position updates as you begin displacement to shelter. Also be advised that weather is forecast to continue for approximately 12 more hours before clearing sufficiently for conventional rescue operations. As Captain Torres acknowledged her transmission and began coordinating his Marines for movement, Rachel felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 47 Marines were depending on her capabilities to survive the next 12 hours in conditions that challenged every aspect of her training and experience. The storm continued to rage around her aircraft as she began the systematic search for the remaining Marine elements, knowing that each passing hour reduced their survival probability while increasing the likelihood of enemy contact. Her precision and dedication were about to be tested in ways that would determine not just the success of her mission, but the very survival of fellow Marines who had never heard her name. While coordinating Captain Torres' movement to shelter, Rachel simultaneously expanded her search pattern to locate the remaining Marine elements scattered across the treacherous mountain terrain. The synthetic aperture radar painted an increasingly complex picture of the operational area. Narrow valleys where thermal signatures could hide, rocky outcroppings that provided natural defensive positions, and countless caves and overhangs that could conceal personnel from both aerial observation and enemy ground forces. The power management crisis was becoming critical. Technical Sergeant Santa's voice crackled through the communication system, with updates that confirmed Rachel's worst fears about the mission's sustainability. Reaper 1, latest telemetry shows you're consuming power at 112% of sustainable levels. At current rates, you'll experience system failures within 4 hours. 4 hours wasn't enough time to locate the remaining Marines, coordinate their movement to safety, and provide overwatch until conventional rescue forces could reach them. Rachel needed to find ways to extend her operational capability while maintaining the sensor and communication systems that were essential to keeping the Marines alive. Miramar, I'm implementing emergency power conservation protocols, she transmitted while systematically shutting down non-essential systems throughout the aircraft, reducing sensor sweep rates and communication relay power to extend operational time. The modifications would reduce her search effectiveness and communication range significantly, but they represented the only way to maintain basic capabilities long enough to complete the mission. Every decision involved accepting increased risk. In one area to manage critical limitations, in another. At 16:23 hours, Rachel detected thermal signatures that indicated the second group of missing Marines. Reaper 7 Bravo was located in a narrow canyon approximately 14 kilometers southeast of Captain Torres' position, exactly where intelligence had suggested they might have moved following the initial firefight. But the thermal imaging revealed a situation far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. I've located what appears to be Reaper 7 Bravo, but they're surrounded. I count 11 Marine thermal signatures in a defensive perimeter with approximately 60 hostile personnel in positions that suggest a coordinated assault is imminent. The tactical situation was a nightmare scenario. 11 Marines with limited ammunition facing overwhelming odds in terrain that provided minimal defensive advantages. The canyon walls that had offered concealment were now becoming a trap, with enemy forces controlling the high ground and all practical escape routes. Major Walsh's response carried the strain of someone coordinating a crisis that was spiraling beyond any worst-case planning scenarios. Reaper 1, can you establish communication with the Bravo element? Rachel switched to alternative frequencies, broadcasting on channels that Reaper 7 Bravo would monitor if they were following standard survival protocols. Reaper 7 Bravo, Reaper 7 Bravo, this is Guardian Angel overhead. Respond if you copy this transmission. The voice that answered was tense with the controlled desperation of Marines facing imminent combat against impossible odds. Guardian Angel, this is Reaper 7 Bravo Actual. We copy your transmission. What took you so long? Staff Sergeant Kevin Murphy, Reaper 7 Bravo's team leader, had a reputation for dark humor even in the worst circumstances. His personnel file indicated 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and the kind of combat experience that qualified him to lead Marines in exactly this type of desperate situation. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, I've been busy. What's your current status and immediate needs? Guardian Angel, we have 11 Marines in defensive positions with approximately 20% ammunition remaining. Enemy forces have us surrounded and appear to be preparing for assault. We need immediate fire support or extraction assets, preferably both. Rachel studied the thermal imaging display, analyzing the enemy positions and movement patterns with the tactical awareness that came from years of observing similar situations through drone sensors. The Taliban forces had established what appeared to be a textbook encirclement, with machine gun positions covering all potential escape routes and assault teams positioned to overwhelm the Marines through coordinated attack. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, I don't have direct fire capability, but I'm analyzing enemy positions for potential tactical solutions. Stand by for instructions. What Rachel was contemplating had never been attempted in the history of modern warfare. Using an unarmed reconnaissance drone to coordinate tactical maneuvers that could allow surrounded Marines to break through enemy encirclement required precise timing, detailed intelligence, and a level of trust between air and ground elements that typically took months to develop. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, I'm going to guide you through a breakout maneuver. You'll need to follow my instructions exactly and move when I tell you to move. Do you copy? Murphy's response reflected both skepticism and the desperation of someone with no other options. Guardian Angel, we copy. You better know what you're doing, because if this goes wrong, we're all dead. Rachel began her analysis by identifying the weakest point in the enemy encirclement. The thermal imaging showed that the Taliban had concentrated their heaviest weapons on the most obvious escape routes, leaving a narrow gap where only a small security element watched a steep, rocky slope that appeared impassable for infantry movement. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, I'm transmitting grid coordinates for your breakout route. It's going to require movement up a 60-degree slope under fire, but it's your only chance of avoiding complete encirclement. The coordinates she provided led to terrain that would challenge even Marines in peak physical condition. The rocky slope offered minimal handholds, no cover from enemy fire, and required climbing skills that weren't part of standard infantry training. But satellite imagery confirmed it was the only route that didn't lead directly into prepared enemy positions. Guardian Angel, Murphy transmitted after reviewing the coordinates. That's not a route, that's a cliff face. My Marines aren't mountain climbers. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, your Marines are about to become mountain climbers, or they're going to become casualties. The enemy assault will begin in approximately 8 minutes based on their movement patterns. You need to start moving now. Rachel's voice carried an authority that transcended rank structure, the confidence of someone who could see the entire tactical picture and understand the mathematics of survival that Murphy couldn't access from his ground-level perspective. Her analysis was based on observing similar tactical situations during hundreds of combat missions, even if those missions had been conducted through screens rather than rifle sights. All Bravo elements, this is Bravo Actual, Murphy transmitted. To his Marines, we're moving to grid coordinates provided by Guardian Angel. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, but it's our only chance. Move now, move fast, and don't look back. Through her thermal imaging system, Rachel watched the Marines begin their desperate climb up the nearly vertical slope. Their movement was painfully slow, limited by the need to assist wounded personnel and carry essential equipment up terrain that challenged every aspect of their physical capabilities. But the alternative was certain death or capture, which motivated superhuman efforts from Marines who understood the stakes. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, enemy forces are moving to assault positions. You have approximately 4 minutes before they discover your movement and redirect fire to your position. The timing was critical. If the Taliban discovered the Marines' escape attempt too early, they could reposition forces to cut off the breakout route. If the Marines moved too slowly, they would be caught in the open on terrain that provided no protection from enemy fire. Rachel needed to coordinate the breakout with split-second precision that left no margin for error. Guardian Angel, Murphy's voice was strained with exertion as he climbed while coordinating his Marines' movement. We're not going to make it. Johnson took shrapnel to the leg and can't climb effectively. We need to leave him or we all die. The moral crisis every combat leader dreaded had arrived. Murphy was facing the choice between sacrificing one Marine to save 10 or risking 11 lives in an attempt to save everyone. It was the kind of decision that destroyed officers mentally, even when they made the tactically correct choice. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual. Negative on leaving personnel. I'm going to buy you time. Continue climbing and don't stop for anything. Rachel made a decision that violated every protocol for unmanned aircraft operations. She dove the MQ-9 toward the Taliban positions at maximum speed, deliberately triggering their air defense protocols and drawing their attention away from the escaping Marines. The aircraft's unusual configuration and sensor arrays would confuse enemy observers who were trained to recognize conventional military aircraft. The maneuver worked exactly as she had calculated. Taliban forces immediately shifted their focus from the ground assault to the approaching aircraft, assuming it represented an immediate airstrike threat that required defensive action. Machine gun positions that had been aimed at the Marines. Escape routes swiveled skyward, searching for targets they couldn't effectively engage with their available weapons. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, you now have a clear movement window. Continue climbing and don't stop until you reach the ridgeline. The diversion gave Murphy's Marines the critical minutes they needed to complete their climb and reach defensive positions on the ridgeline above the canyon. From that elevated position, they could control the high ground and force any pursuing enemy forces to assault uphill against prepared positions, a tactical advantage that transformed their situation from hopeless to merely desperate. Guardian Angel, this is Reaper 7 Bravo Actual. We've reached the ridgeline and have established defensive positions. I don't know how you did that, but you just saved 11 Marines' lives. Rachel felt a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on the larger mission requirements. She had successfully extracted one group of Marines from immediate danger, but Captain Torres still needed support reaching shelter, and the third group, Reaper 7 Charlie, remained completely unaccounted for. The power consumption from her aggressive maneuvering had accelerated system failures that threatened to end her mission prematurely. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. Bravo element is secure in defensive positions. Continuing search for Charlie element, while monitoring Alpha element's movement to shelter. Power status is critical. Estimate 2 hours of operational capability remaining. The mathematical reality was stark. She needed at least 4 hours to complete all mission requirements, but only had power for 2 hours of operations. The experimental systems that had made the mission possible were also limiting its duration in ways that could doom the Marines she was trying to save. Dr. Rodriguez's voice emerged from the communication system with a potential solution that pushed the boundaries of safe aircraft operation. Reaper 1, we've analyzed your power consumption patterns and identified non-critical systems that can be shut down to extend operational time. However, this will require operating the aircraft in manual flight mode rather than automated systems. Manual flight mode meant Rachel would need to actively pilot the aircraft while simultaneously operating sensor systems, coordinating Marine movements, and monitoring enemy positions. It represented a workload that exceeded human capabilities under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. Miramar, I copy. Switching to manual flight operations and implementing emergency power conservation. Continuing mission. As Rachel took direct control of the aircraft while managing multiple other responsibilities, she began the search for Reaper 7 Charlie with the knowledge that time was running out for everyone involved in the operation. The storm continued to rage, enemy forces were adapting to her presence, and system failures were accelerating with each passing hour. But 20 Marines remained missing somewhere in the mountains, and Rachel's precision and dedication were the only things standing between them and death in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The mission that had begun as an impossible rescue operation was becoming a test of human capability against overwhelming odds. And the outcome remained very much in doubt. Operating the MQ-9 in manual flight mode while managing sensor systems and coordinating 3 separate Marine elements pushed Rachel beyond any training scenario she had ever experienced. Her hands moved constantly between flight controls and sensor interfaces, while her eyes tracked multiple data streams simultaneously. The visual processing differences that had once kept her from combat operations now became essential as she processed information at rates that would overwhelm most operators. The search for Reaper 7 Charlie was complicated by terrain that challenged every aspect of her technical capabilities. The northeastern section of the operational area consisted of nearly vertical cliff faces, deep ravines, and rocky outcroppings that created thermal shadows where personnel could remain undetected even by advanced sensor systems. If Charlie Element had established positions in this terrain, they were either extremely well concealed or no longer generating detectable thermal signatures. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. Rachel transmitted as she completed her fourth systematic sweep of the area where Reaper 7 Charlie should have been positioned. No thermal contacts in the designated overwatch positions. Expanding search to alternate locations. The absence of thermal signatures was deeply troubling. Marine snipers and designated marksmen who comprised Charlie Element were trained to remain concealed under the most challenging conditions, but they were also trained to maintain communication schedules and respond to emergency frequencies. The complete radio silence suggested either total communication equipment failure or something far worse. Major Walsh's voice carried the strain of coordinating a crisis that seemed to deteriorate with each status update. Reaper 1, be advised. We're receiving intelligence reports of increased enemy activity throughout your operational area. Multiple sources indicate they're bringing in reinforcements specifically to locate and eliminate our personnel. The tactical picture was becoming increasingly desperate. Taliban and militia forces weren't just conducting routine searches. They were implementing a coordinated operation designed to systematically eliminate any American presence in the region. The successful elimination of their high-value target had clearly triggered a response that went beyond typical enemy reactions to special operations raids. At 1847 hours, Rachel's systematic search methodology finally yielded results that explained Charlie Element silence. Thermal imaging revealed a scene that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Scattered heat signatures in a narrow valley that suggested a completed firefight rather than living personnel. The thermal patterns indicated bodies that had been exposed to extreme cold for several hours, their core temperatures having dropped below levels that sustained life. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. I've located thermal signatures consistent with Reaper 7 Charlie's last known position. The signature suggests ... casualties, multiple personnel down with no signs of life. The words carried a weight that transcended tactical reporting. 18 Marines were confirmed dead or dying, representing the largest single loss of Marine Force reconnaissance personnel in recent operational history. The successful mission to eliminate a high-value target had come at a cost that would devastate families and communities across America. Colonel Brennan's voice emerged from the communication system with the controlled tone of someone delivering information he wished he didn't have to share. Reaper 1, can you confirm personnel count and any signs of survivors in the Charlie Element area? Rachel adjusted her sensor settings to maximum resolution, studying the thermal signatures with the methodical thoroughness that had characterized her approach to every mission over 8 years. The images were difficult to interpret through the storm conditions, but patterns suggested a firefight that had lasted several hours before ending in complete enemy victory. Miramar, I count 18 thermal signatures consistent with deceased personnel. No movement detected. No response to emergency frequency transmissions. She paused, processing additional sensor data that revealed details no one wanted to hear. Evidence suggests they were overrun after expending all available ammunition. The silence that followed her report reflected the weight of loss that every person monitoring the mission felt simultaneously. 18 Marines had died fighting against overwhelming odds while isolated from support, their sacrifice ensuring that intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities could be transmitted to support surviving elements, but Rachel couldn't afford to dwell on the loss. Captain Torres and Staff Sergeant Murphy still had Marines depending on her continued support, and system failures were accelerating at rates that threatened to end her mission before she could complete coordination. For their survival, the power conservation measures had bought precious time, but fundamental limitations couldn't be overcome indefinitely. Reaper 7 Alpha Actual, this is Guardian Angel, she transmitted to Captain Torres. Confirm your current status and position relative to the shelter coordinates I provided earlier. Torres' response indicated exhaustion and strain, but also the disciplined professionalism of someone maintaining command effectiveness under extreme duress. Guardian Angel, we're approximately 500 meters from the cave entrance. 2. Stretcher cases are slowing movement significantly, but we're maintaining security and making steady progress. Reaper 7 Alpha Actual, be advised enemy forces are converging on your general area from multiple directions. You have approximately 30 minutes to reach shelter before hostile contact becomes likely. The timing created an impossible situation. Torres needed more than 30 minutes to safely move his casualties to the cave complex, but enemy forces would reach the area before he could complete the movement. Rachel needed to find ways to delay the converging Taliban forces without direct fire capability and with rapidly diminishing aircraft systems. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, this is Guardian Angel. She transmitted to Staff Sergeant Murphy's position on the ridgeline. I need you to create a diversion that draws enemy attention away from Alpha Element's movement to shelter. Murphy's response reflected both understanding of the tactical requirement and skepticism about his ability to execute it effectively. Guardian Angel, we're in defensive positions with limited ammunition and no mobility. What kind of diversion did you have in mind? Rachel studied the tactical situation, analyzing terrain features and enemy positions with the spatial reasoning that had distinguished her throughout her drone operations career. The solution required using Murphy's Marines not as direct combatants, but as bait to manipulate enemy movement patterns in ways that created opportunities for Torres' escape. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, you're going to conduct a false flag operation. Open fire on enemy positions to the south of your location, then immediately displace north to alternate positions. This should draw pursuit away from Alpha Element's movement corridor. The maneuver would expose Murphy's Marines to significant risk while providing only minimal tactical advantage. But it represented the only option for buying Torres the time he needed to reach shelter with his wounded personnel. The mathematics of survival sometimes required accepting certain risks to prevent worse outcomes. Guardian Angel, understood. We'll execute on your command. Rachel coordinated the timing carefully, monitoring enemy movement patterns while tracking Torres' progress toward the cave entrance. The deception required split-second timing that synchronized Murphy's diversion with optimal positioning of all tactical elements. Too early, and the enemy would have time to reposition before Torres reached safety. Too late, and converging forces would overwhelm both Marine elements simultaneously. Reaper 7 Bravo Actual, execute diversion now. Through her thermal imaging system, Rachel watched Murphy's Marines open fire on Taliban positions nearly a kilometer south of their actual location. The sudden appearance of American small arms fire from an unexpected direction triggered exactly the response she had calculated. Enemy forces immediately shifted movement to pursue what they assumed was a larger Marine element attempting to break contact. Reaper 7 Alpha Actual, you now have a clear movement to shelter. Move fast and don't stop until you're inside the cave complex. Torres' Marines completed their movement just as enemy forces reached Murphy's former position on the ridge line. The timing was so precise that Taliban forces arrived at empty positions while Torres' Marines disappeared into cave systems that would protect them from both weather and enemy observation. Guardian Angel, this is Reaper 7 Alpha Actual. All personnel are secure in shelter with overhead cover. I don't know how you're doing this from wherever you are, but you've saved a lot of Marines today. The successful coordination of both Marine elements to defensive positions represented a tactical achievement that had never been accomplished with unmanned systems. But Rachel's satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that her aircraft was approaching complete system failure. Warning indicators showed critical malfunctions in multiple systems that couldn't be repaired or bypassed. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. Both surviving Marine elements are secure in defensive positions. However, aircraft systems are failing rapidly. I estimate 15 to 20 minutes of operational capability remaining. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled through communication systems that were themselves beginning to fail as electrical problems cascaded throughout the aircraft's modified systems. Reaper 1, you've accomplished the primary mission objectives. Consider returning to base before complete system failure occurs. The suggestion was tactically sound and represented standard protocol for aircraft experiencing critical malfunctions. But Rachel understood that returning to base would leave Torres and Murphy's Marines without communication relay capabilities or intelligence support during the critical hours before conventional rescue operations became possible. Negative, Miramar. I'm staying on station until system failure forces return to base. These Marines need continued overwatch support. The decision violated safety protocols and risked losing a multi-million-dollar aircraft to preventable system failures. But it reflected the same dedication to mission accomplishment that had characterized Rachel's approach to every assignment throughout her career, even when those assignments had been overlooked or undervalued by her fellow Marines. Colonel. Brennan's voice carried both admiration and concern when he responded to her decision. Reaper 1, we understand your commitment to the mission, but don't risk your aircraft unnecessarily. You've already accomplished more than anyone thought possible. Rachel continued monitoring both Marine positions while managing increasingly unstable aircraft systems. The thermal imaging array was intermittently failing, communication systems were experiencing complete dropouts, and flight control responses were becoming erratic as electrical problems affected primary aircraft systems. At 19:23 hours, she detected movement that confirmed her decision to remain on station had been correct. Enemy forces were conducting systematic searches of the cave complex area, using techniques that suggested they had intelligence about American personnel in the region. Without her continued overwatch, Torres Marines could easily be discovered and eliminated by forces they couldn't detect from their concealed positions. Reaper 7 Alpha Actual. The advised enemy forces are conducting close-range searches of your area. Maintain complete noise and light discipline. 1 count approximately 20 personnel moving through the valley below your position. Torres' response was barely audible through communication systems that were failing progressively. Guardian Angel. Copy. We're total silence until ... Give it all clear. The communication breakdown meant Rachel could no longer coordinate complex tactical maneuvers or provide detailed intelligence to the Marines on the ground. But she could still monitor enemy positions and provide basic warnings that might mean the difference between detection and continued concealment. For the next hour, she watched Taliban forces conduct methodical searches that came within meters of discovering Torres' position multiple times. Her ability to provide early warning about enemy approach routes allowed the Marines to maintain absolute silence during critical moments when any sound would have resulted in immediate discovery. An overwhelming assault. At 20:34 hours, complete electrical failure finally forced Rachel to terminate her mission. The aircraft system shut down in sequence as power consumption exceeded the capacity of backup batteries that had sustained operations long beyond their design specifications. The last image transmitted by her thermal sensors showed enemy forces moving away from the cave complex after completing their search without discovering the hidden Marines. Miramar, this is Reaper 1. Complete system failure is imminent. Returning to base immediately. All marine elements remain secure in defensive positions. Mission ... accomplished. The final transmission marked the end of an operation that had redefined what was possible with unmanned systems and individual dedication. Rachel had located, coordinated, and secured the survival of 29 Marines using capabilities that existed nowhere else in the military. Her precision and expertise had transformed an impossible rescue scenario into a successful coordination effort that would allow conventional forces to complete the actual extraction when weather conditions improved. As the crippled MQ-9 began its emergency return flight to Miramar, Rachel knew that she had finally proven the value of capabilities that had been overlooked and underestimated for 8 years. The mission that had begun as an attempt to locate missing Marines had become a demonstration of what dedication, precision, and innovative thinking could accomplish when lives depended on exceptional performance. The damaged MQ-9 limped back to Miramar on emergency power systems, its experimental equipment permanently disabled and structural integrity compromised by the extreme weather conditions it had endured. Rachel nursed the aircraft through a landing that required manual control of systems that had been designed for automated operation, her hands steady despite 18 hours of continuous operations that had pushed human endurance beyond documented limits. As the aircraft rolled to a stop on the fog-shrouded runway at 0247 hours, emergency vehicles surrounded it with the organized chaos that followed any aircraft declaring in-flight emergencies. But the real drama was unfolding in the operations center, where reports from Afghanistan confirmed that conventional rescue operations had successfully extracted all surviving Marines as weather conditions finally improved. Major Walsh stood before the main display screen, reading the after-action report that detailed the most successful personnel recovery operation in Marine Corps' history. Ladies and gentlemen, at 0130 local time, elements of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit successfully extracted 29 Marines from defensive positions in the Spingar Mountains. All personnel are alive and receiving medical treatment at Bagram Air Base. The relief in the operations center was palpable, but it was tempered by the knowledge that 18 Marines from Reaper 7 Charlie had made the ultimate sacrifice during the mission. The successful rescue of their fellow Marines didn't diminish the loss of those who had died fighting against overwhelming odds in some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Colonel Brennan approached Rachel as she completed post-flight procedures on the destroyed aircraft, his expression reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and something approaching awe. The man who had questioned her capabilities less than 24 hours earlier now looked at her with the respect reserved for warriors who had proven themselves under the most extreme circumstances. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, "I've been in the Marine Corps for 26 years, and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished out there. You didn't just save those Marines, you redefined what we thought was possible with unmanned systems and individual initiative." Rachel nodded acknowledgement while continuing her methodical documentation of equipment failures and operational challenges. The mission had ended successfully, but the after-action analysis would determine whether the techniques she had developed could be replicated and incorporated into standard doctrine for future operations. "Sir, I was just doing my job." The Marines on the ground did the hard work, surviving in impossible conditions and following tactical guidance from someone they couldn't see. All I did was provide information and coordination support. Brennan shook his head with the firmness of someone who understood exactly what he had witnessed. "Staff Sergeant, what you did went far beyond providing information. You conducted tactical coordination that saved lives and achieved mission success under conditions that would have defeated conventional approaches." The initial reports from Captain Torres and Staff Sergeant Murphy provided details that illustrated the complexity of what Rachel had accomplished. The timing required to coordinate Murphy's diversion while Torres moved his wounded Marines to safety had involved split-second calculations that accounted for terrain, weather, enemy movement patterns, and human endurance factors that exceeded standard tactical planning methodologies. Dr. Rodriguez arrived from her monitoring station in California, having flown immediately to Miramar to assess the experimental equipment and analyze the mission's technical achievements. Her preliminary evaluation confirmed that the thermal, imaging, and communication relay systems had performed beyond theoretical capabilities, despite operating under conditions that exceeded all design specifications. Staff Sergeant Hayes, Dr. Rodriguez said as she reviewed the equipment telemetry data, "The sensor fusion techniques you developed during this mission represent breakthrough applications that we hadn't considered during system design. You essentially created new operational procedures while conducting the mission. The implications extended beyond the immediate rescue operation." Rachel's innovative use of unmanned systems for real-time tactical coordination had demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize personnel recovery operations and special operations support. Military commanders who had viewed drone operations as supplementary intelligence gathering now understood their potential as primary mission platforms. General Hayes' voice emerged from the secure communication system as senior leadership at Quantico provided their assessment of the mission's strategic implications. "Miramar, this is General Hayes. The techniques developed and demonstrated during Operation Guardian Angel will be studied and incorporated into doctrine at the highest levels of military planning." The recognition was unprecedented for someone whose career had been defined by professional invisibility. But Rachel remained focused on the practical aspects of what had been accomplished, rather than the accolades that were beginning to accumulate from commands throughout the military hierarchy. Captain Mitchell appeared in the operations center as dawn broke over the California coastline, his pilot's flight suit still damp with perspiration from the training mission he had just completed. The same officer who had dismissed her capabilities with casual contempt now approached with the demeanor of someone seeking to understand excellence he hadn't previously recognized. "Hayes," he said simply, "I owe you an apology. I completely misunderstood what you do and what you're capable of. What happened out there? That was combat leadership at the highest level." The acknowledgement represented more than personal recognition. It reflected a fundamental shift in how the Marine Corps' aviation community viewed unmanned systems and the personnel who operated them. Rachel's mission had demonstrated that drone operations required the same tactical acumen, technical expertise, and commitment to mission accomplishment that characterized any combat specialty. "Captain, no apology necessary. Everyone has their role to play in supporting Marines in combat. Yesterday just happened to be my turn to step up when it mattered." Master Chief Thompson, who had provided consultation during mission planning, studied the tactical timeline with the analytical mind of someone who had participated in similar rescue operations from the ground perspective. His assessment carried particular weight because he understood both the strategic complexities and individual courage required for successful personnel recovery missions. "Staff Sergeant, I've been involved in more rescue operations than I care to count, and I've never seen coordination this precise executed under these conditions. You kept those Marines alive through 18 of the most dangerous hours they'll ever experience." The technical analysis revealed details that illustrated the extraordinary nature of Rachel's performance. Operating the aircraft manually while managing sensor systems and coordinating multiple Marine elements had required information processing rates that approached the limits of human cognitive capability. The visual processing differences that had kept her from combat operations had actually enhanced her ability to manage complex data streams under extreme stress. Gunnery Sergeant Park appeared with coffee and the knowing smile of someone who had recognized exceptional capability long before it received official acknowledgement. "Hayes, I told you that 90% of this base would kill for your skills. Turns out I underestimated the percentage." The joke drew tired laughter from personnel, who had monitored the mission throughout its 18-hour duration. But beneath the humor was genuine appreciation for someone who had proven that capability and dedication could overcome any institutional limitation or personal prejudice. At 08:00 hours, as Rachel finally prepared to leave the operations center, for the first rest she had experienced in over 24 hours, Major Walsh approached with news that would fundamentally alter her military career trajectory. "Hayes, I just received a call from Headquarters Marine Corps. You're being reassigned to the Pentagon for a new position developing unmanned systems doctrine. The promotion to gunnery sergeant is effective immediately, and there's talk of a direct commission to officer status if you're interested." The career advancement represented validation that transcended personal satisfaction. The Marine Corps was acknowledging that her specialized expertise warranted the highest levels of professional recognition and responsibility. More importantly, it meant that future Marines would benefit from the techniques and procedures she had developed during impossible circumstances. "Ma'am, I appreciate the opportunities, but I'd like to continue working with operational units. The real value of unmanned systems is in supporting Marines in combat, not in developing policies from Washington." Walsh nodded with understanding, recognizing the response of someone whose motivation centered on mission accomplishment rather than personal advancement. "The assignment includes regular rotation to operational commands and direct involvement in mission planning. You won't be stuck behind a desk if that's what you're worried about." 3 weeks later, Rachel stood before an assembly of senior Marine Corps leadership at a ceremony that formally recognized her achievements during Operation Guardian Angel. The distinguished flying cross she received was unprecedented for unmanned systems operations, establishing a precedent that acknowledged the courage and skill required for modern drone warfare. But the real recognition came from a different source. Captain Torres and Staff Sergeant Murphy, recovered from their ordeal and present at the ceremony, approached her after the formal proceedings with expressions that conveyed more than any official commendation could capture. "Ma'am," Torres said, using the rank acknowledgement that reflected both her promotion and his respect, "I want you to know that every Marine who made it home from that mountain talks about Guardian Angel. You've got 29 Marines who will never forget what you did for us." Murphy nodded his agreement, adding his own assessment with characteristic directness. "Ma'am, you saved our lives using skills and equipment most people don't even understand. That's what being a Marine is really about, finding ways to accomplish impossible missions when your fellow Marines are depending on you." The comments reflected a fundamental truth about military service that transcended specialty designations or career fields. Excellence revealed itself through performance under pressure, not through traditional metrics of recognition or advancement. Rachel's 8 years of professional invisibility had ended with a single mission that demonstrated capabilities that redefined what the Marine Corps expected from its personnel. 6 months after Operation Guardian Angel, Rachel received a letter that provided the most meaningful recognition of her achievement. It came from the wife of Lance Corporal David Kim, one of the Marines she had helped rescue from the mountains of Afghanistan. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," the letter began, "my husband told me about the voice that guided them to safety during the worst night of their lives. He said Guardian Angel was the calm professional voice that kept them focused on survival when everything seemed hopeless. I wanted you to know that our 2-year-old daughter will grow up with her father because of what you did that night." The letter captured the human dimension of military service that transcended tactical achievements or professional recognition. 29 families had been spared the devastating loss that military service sometimes demanded, and that outcome resulted directly from the precision, dedication, and innovative thinking that Rachel had applied during impossible circumstances. The Marine Corps incorporated the tactical procedures she had developed into standard doctrine for personnel recovery operations, ensuring that future crises would benefit from techniques proven under the most challenging conditions. Her visual Processing differences, once considered a disqualifying limitation, became recognized as an advantage that enhanced performance in modern warfare scenarios requiring complex information management. But perhaps the most significant change was in how her fellow Marines viewed both her capabilities and the broader potential of personnel who had been marginalized by traditional military categories. The same Marines who had once mocked her worn boots now understood that those boots had carried someone whose expertise could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As Rachel walked across the Miramar flight line on a quiet California morning, observing the routine activities of military aviation with eyes that had seen beyond the conventional boundaries of what was possible, she reflected on the journey that had led from professional obscurity to recognition as one of the Marine Corps' most innovative operators. The aircraft hangars, training facilities, and operational centers looked the same as they had 8 years earlier when she first arrived at the base. But everything had changed in ways that would benefit Marines facing impossible circumstances in future conflicts. Her precision had saved lives, her dedication had redefined doctrine, and her willingness to push beyond accepted limitations had demonstrated that true capability often existed in the most unexpected places. The boots that had once drawn mockery now carried someone whose name was known throughout the special operations community as the Marine, who had proven that warfare's most important victories sometimes came from the quiet dedication of individuals who refused to accept that missions were impossible simply because they had never been accomplished before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.